Now, it's a fairly straight copy off of the photograph. I haven't really done anything to this besides just try to observe what is there before me. So my job as a vehicle, as someone who's trying to come up with a creative vehicle, is to take this as a starting point. Let me go ahead and save this and show you what I'm talking about. Now this is something that is going to require a little bit of digital skill, but here's our original drawing. I'm just going to simply duplicate it. Let's make our canvas larger. Made a copy of this car. I'll make another copy of it too. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to actually start to stylize this car. This is just a copy of what I've just sketched. Right? I'll use the transform tool. Perspective. There's a little bit of a distortion on this car. The back and the front are kind of at an angle. Anytime you have parallel lines in a drawing, it tends to flatten a drawing. But anytime you've got lines that look like they're going to intersect at a certain point, you kind of remove the flatness. You start to give the drawing a little bit more solidity. And you'll see this in a lot of cartoons where houses and vehicles have a little bit more, we call it the cartoony look, but really it's just taking what's real and adding a little bit of an exaggeration. The exaggeration is done through, tweaking the perspective, also using the distort and skew tools within Photoshop. So I've got a drawing here. I've applied some perspective to it. And also go in and adjust the skew. So here's what I have, and here's what I started out with. See the difference there between those two? So start out with a sketch. Find a good reference. You can use a Google Internet search, and that's generally pretty decent, but you may be at the mercy of the angles that you have to work with. So if it's a car that you know and have access to that you can photograph, that's probably the best way to go. But barring that, one source that I use is Flickr, FLICKR.com, Flickr.com. Usually it's kind of a photo gallery that people just submit the photos that they've taken, and they just post it up there, and usually I can find some pretty good angles. I also like to draw from cars that I find in the junkyard. So Flickr has a fantastic pool called, they've got a group called Abandoned Cars. And I like these old cars from the 50s and 40s and 30s and in various states of disrepair. And I'll usually work from those to go ahead and draw. In fact, all the vehicles that I've shown you in my presentation were actually vehicles that I just saw on Flickr, and they were all beaten up, dilapidated, and I went ahead and drew them. I like that. To me, I can't restore a car, but I can at least try to make it look pretty in a drawing. So here, that's one method. I'm going to take the second duplicate that I have. I'm just going to try something else with it. Let's go ahead and use the distort tool. The distort tool is different from the perspective tool in that you can control each corner independently by itself. And sometimes what I end up doing is I use a combination of the perspective, distort, and skew just to find the best fit. Find something that's going to work for the drawing that you're looking for. Now, you can see here that That's kind of yielding something similar, but I can go in a completely different direction if I wanted to. I can actually go ahead and use the perspective tool. Out the opposite way. Maybe if I'm trying to suggest a worm's eye view, where I'm looking up at the shot, I might want to go for that angle. Now, there is some distortion. It's not going to look completely right, but if you've got a very, very small character looking up at an object, those, the front and back lines are going to look as if they're kind of moving away from one another, right, in the opposite direction. Are there any questions on this? Is this something that you've been exposed to before? Just looking at an existing design and pulling it apart as blocks. So I want to show you the vehicle that we're going to work on in class. Actually, a much more exciting vehicle. That's what we're going to draw. So how would you approach something like this? You've got the image, right? How would you start this particular design? If you had to capture this, what's the very first step?
Block it out.
Block it out. So we can see that it looks like a rectangle where one of the sides is tapered. It's almost shaped like a wedge. So that's what we want to start out with drawing, right? We want to draw the wedge first. Once we get the wedge, then we can add the windshield and the side windows. So let me go ahead and take this drawing, and I'll leave it up here for you guys too. I'm so used to disappointment that it's actually surprising when something works. Okay, so here's how I would start this project. I'll go ahead and first of all establish the basic shape of this wedge. So by the two front lines right here, by them being a little bit smaller in height, I'm kind of implying that the rectangle doesn't have parallel lines. It's actually an intersection of particular points. Right? Then I want to think about where the windshield's going to be. The windshield looks like on the car, the windshield's kind of towards the back of it. It looks like I need to extend the back a little bit more, right? Because it looks like there's a wheel well there after that, so no problem, we can do that. In this case, there's a curvature. It's this curve right here. That I need to go ahead and document. And then we've got a tail fin. I guess these guys might be rear view mirrors.
They only care about it.
Yeah, they're always looking ahead of them. They're not going to look back, right?
Good life lesson too.
Yeah. There you go. Up there. Like
Don't stop.